in energy, there are a lot of problems with greenwashing, which is, false claims being made about the green credentials of things, sometimes willfully and sometimes just through poor accounting systems. Like even in the stock market, I think Dole, the pineapple company, was outed by Bloomberg for having issued, I think, like 30% more shares than actually were in existence because their record keeping system wasn't particularly good. And it was only when they had like a rights issue and people like made claims for more than 100% of the shares that they had on their registry that they realized that there was a problem. And I think so this is, within energy, you've got versions of this. For example, carbon credits I own and I sell to you, but then I try and sell them to somebody else because I haven't kept a good record. Or somebody like a bad actor has retired a credit but then tried to sell it.
Today we have the pleasure to interview Jemma, the CEO and co-founder of Powerledger. And I know that you have a PhD and you pursue a career within the Web2 world, and you've shared that journey from the Web2 to the Web3 world. And I feel like everyone that has been following it closely knows the factual detail of the journey, but I'm really interested in that emotional side of the journey. And how did you decide to progress from Web2 to Web3? But also, I know that on like your PhD, you were focusing on how to build a eco village, and that's how you found your co-founder. So just run me through that emotional side of the journey, and it's quite a long and convoluted question, but yeah, just give me the TLDR of it.
Certainly. So Powerledger is a DePIN project, and we make software for like utilities to help them innovate to make new products for their customers. They want to be more granular and specific about energy, so people can the utilities customers can trade energy peer to peer or choose their own energy mix or understand exactly like where they're getting their energy from. Is it like local and from where? And if you think about like what is DePIN, it's like a recent like term that was coined, but it's really about bringing Web 2 into Web 3, which is ultimately what Web 3 is about. And so we actually make like software solutions for utilities and large corporates that are predominantly, if not entirely, Web 2 companies, and to imbue into the products Web 3 elements. And we've had the company for 8 years, and we kind of have experimented with different ways of doing that and also increased the kind of Web 3 flavor over time. And I got into Web 3 without, that wasn't even a term in 2016 when I met John Bullich, my business partner. It was really blockchain. And I'd really only heard of that and Bitcoin notionally. And John had been working in crypto and blockchain for several years. So he's a true OG. I call myself more of a dinosaur. And as you mentioned, like I was designing a solar and battery system for my PhD for an eco village in Fremantle in Western Australia. And I just had a baby and I was not really looking to set up a company at all. I was kind of looking to kind of have a little bit of maternity leave, but I was stuck in my PhD trying to find software that would allow the trading of electricity within the eco village. So the eco village had a solar farm and batteries, and each of the houses within the eco village could get a portion of the solar electricity and the battery electricity allocated to them. But if they weren't home to consume that allocation, what I wanted to happen was that they could trade their allocation with their neighbours and offset their electricity bill. I wasn't able to find any software that did that. And I was introduced to John through I used to work in banking, a former banking colleague of mine that wanted me to introduce John to some people in my network. And he started telling me a little bit about blockchain and the applications he was developing, and I just said could it do anything for my doctoral research? And we started to look together and saw a lot of opportunities in tokenizing energy, tokenizing renewable energy certificates, tokenizing carbon credits, and then creating these new kind of decentralized energy markets, local energy markets, which are lovely for consumers to be able to kind of share their energy with each other, but also actually good for the grid, because the more locally energy is consumed, like in close proximity to where it's generated, that actually puts less strain on the grid. And this is increasingly important for the grid. Otherwise, it has to build more poles and wires and upgrade infrastructure like substations, which is really expensive. So like a local energy model, energy market model could encourage generation of electricity nearer to the point of consumption of electricity, and a leaner grid. So yeah, it was really like 3 months after meeting John that he and I both got very enthusiastic and decided to set up the company. And we operated out of Australia for 7 years. And then a year ago, we moved the company to Zug in Switzerland. And we did that because we didn't have any clients in Australia. And most of our clients were in Europe and North America and India. And so we just decided to base ourselves closer to the markets in which we operate. Particularly by this stage, like that stage, I had 2 more kids. So I've got a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old now. And traveling long periods of time away from my family was really just not great. And so we thought, why don't we move closer, make life easier for ourselves, and also be able to support the markets better? Because even if you do come to Europe for 2 weeks, you still miss like all the activities going on in the rest of the year. And then we chose Zug because it's Crypto Valley, and we're now part of the blockchain ecosystem here, meeting other blockchain companies and really understanding more day-to-day sense what's happening in the space, which has been really helpful. And as a result of that, we've also started investing in other companies in Web3 as well, because we understand what it's like to be a founder and an entrepreneur, and also how to work in and grow a business. So yeah, I think that the business, we make software for other companies, but we also now invest in other companies that are seeking early stage and growth capital. And yeah, so it was really not my intention to become an entrepreneur. It was a kind of accidental thing, I'd say.
And the idea that academic education is obsolete has been gaining traction, and I feel like one of the reasons that you founded Powerledger is because you met your business partner through your academic journey. So what's your take on that notion, but also do you think that the skill set that you develop as a researcher is applicable within the business realm? I used to be in the camp that I don't want to pursue further higher education because I would rather just go and become a business partner or start working on a project. That's the best way to obtain the required skills to grow a project. But I'd love to. I mean, it's different when you're a doctor. You can't just go out there and start practicing. But when it comes to business management and this practical activities, I think it might be better to just go and do it.
I agree with you. I mean, my PhD was really incidental to my project, in the sense of, like, I got the idea to do the eco village like just as something I wanted to do, and like a friend persuaded me to do that as a PhD, as applied research. So the project was something that I was working on, notwithstanding, and spearheading, notwithstanding the PhD. So it ended up becoming an applied research project. But I just think that so many hours is spent. I wouldn't recommend doing a PhD to someone at all. And I got the idea for Powerledger halfway through the PhD. So I wouldn't say it was because, it's in part because of it, but I just see so many years and so much money spent on these traditional academic institutions, and it's really questionable how prepared people are as a result of all the time spent there, if they were to alternatively curate something that was more aligned with the things that they're interested in, and the kind of more technical skills that they might need for a particular pursuit. I mean, having said that, having some base skills and having gone deep in a particular subject is good, and the format of a university degree makes you do that. But I think if you're like a disciplined person and you're really motivated, you don't need that. And I would just as easily like work with or hire somebody that doesn't have a degree that's developed skills and acumen notwithstanding that. And yeah, I think when you see job specifications that, you need a master's level degree, I mean, of course, as you said, with certain things like certain professions, that's, more of a prerequisite of certain skills, like in the medical profession. But even then, like, I'm not sure that having that degree actually makes you excellent. Uh, so yeah, I think it could be much better for people that are minded to work in the business field to develop certain skill sets, do internships, or try and like work alongside people that they really respect and admire, and try and model and learn those skills themselves directly.
And I want us to talk about Powerledger, but before we um, dig a bit deeper, I want to touch on this like very high level of why do we need blockchain within that ecosystem. And you describe
Mm.
Powerledger as essentially a software that enables companies to track energy. But could you now explain why do you need this essential component as blockchain, and also why that won't be possible without blockchain?
Yeah. Well, it's not an essential component, and it is possible without blockchain, is the short answer, Ivan. That's not to say you wouldn't want to use blockchain. So, you got like a corner store or like a milk bar where you can go and buy, bread, cheese, milk. You've got like a Tesco's in the UK where you can buy those same things, or, Waitrose. And what's the difference? Well, the difference is that Tesco's and Waitrose and Sainsbury, M&S all have barcodes. And so the stock control's better. There's less likely to be product on the shelves that is out of date. When you go through the till, it's faster. There's less mistakes. But like the corner store is just is a legitimate place to buy things, and it's not like, I doubt you would ever go, well, I'm going to Sainsbury's because of the barcodes. Like, you just never do that. But the fact that it's got that there means that it's all more efficient. And I think it's like analogous to using blockchain in the use case of energy. It in energy there are a lot of problems with greenwashing, which is, false claims being made about the green credentials of things, sometimes willfully and sometimes just through poor accounting systems. Like even in the stock market, I think Dole, the pineapple company, was outed by Bloomberg for having issued, I think, like 30% more shares than actually were in existence, because their record keeping system wasn't particularly good. And it was only when they had like a rights issue and people like made claims for more than 100% of the shares that they had on their registry that they realized that there was a problem. And I think so. This is, within energy, you've got versions of this. For example, carbon credits that I own and I sell to you, but then I try and sell them to somebody else because I haven't kept a good record. Or somebody, like a bad actor, has retired a credit, but then tried to sell it, notwithstanding that. And so, and the carbon credit field and the renewable energy certificate field suffers from this, because then they're seen as kind of phony, and companies don't want to participate in buying offsets. And you can see a movement around that now as a result of that. For example, I mean, it's not just because of this, but it's certainly a big part of it. There was a big scandal last year that was revealed by The Guardian around a carbon credit registry called Vera that had a lot of credits on its registry that were found to actually not even have a real project underneath them at all, let alone this kind of double counting thing that I just mentioned. And a lot of companies stopped buying as a result of that. And then some companies made announcements, in part because of this. and also in part because of other factors. So, for example, companies that are very involved in AI use a lot of energy. AI is already using 3 times the amount of energy as blockchain, and it's only just the beginning. And like companies like Google and Microsoft have recently announced they're now changing their plans around like offsetting. And other companies like EasyJet and Nestle, Gucci have all made comments about retrograde steps they're taking in this space, and different approaches that they want to take. And so greenwash is a real concern. Like if companies don't know how to buy quality, they just stop buying. And you could see in end of 2023, there was like a massive, massive drop in the amount of carbon credits that was being purchased. It's somewhat bounced back this year, but there's this other dynamic which I've just alluded to here. So I think what blockchain provides is a rock solid audit trail that can alleviate, not all, but some of these issues, and allow for easier tracking of the underlying projects, and also ease of settlement between counterparties. So if you and I are trading energy with each other, we could settle in a stable coin off the back of a smart meter. And that is really appealing because normally you get your electricity bill every 60 days or 90 days, and then you pay it like a month later. And so it's very latent in terms of the market. You can create a more real-time, agile market using digital currency and cryptographic tokens to settle fast, and that can create a totally new product and user experience. So I wouldn't say it's essential. It can be all of it can be done without it, but having it there provides something that is really interesting and unique and relevant.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting arc that you outlined. The issue is essentially greenwashing, and it's very challenging for any corporation to keep a track on it with the traditional methods. And what blockchain enables is this order trail that's immutable and no one can change. And I really like this. So the next stage is choosing the right blockchain. And I know that you guys went through a lot of alterations of it. You started building comparatively early, so you didn't have as much choice, but you started on EchoChain, and then you moved to a proof of authority chain on Ethereum, and then a few years ago you forked Solana. So could you just run me through this entire journey? And then you recently actually announced that you'll be on Solana, and then you also have a ERC20 token. So could you just explain that entire journey to me and the entire thought process of like, why did you choose Solana over any other blockchain? Why did you essentially fork Solana? I mean, I guess it's the latency and the speed and everything else that it does. But because you also have like the L2s, they're comparatively fast. So if you can just give me that like comparative analysis of why did you choose Solana over any other blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've summed a lot of it up already, Ivan, but from, in my own words, when we set up the company, which was in May of 2016, we knew it was early days, and we didn't want to wed ourselves to any one protocol because we knew that the space was going to be innovating and exploring. So we kept things in a way that allowed us to be experimental but not like tied. And our actual first blockchain, we forked Bitcoin for that, and then we developed EcoChain, which you mentioned, which is a private consortium chain based on Ethereum. We did some experimentation with JP Morgan's chain, and then we hard forked Solana, and we did that because Ethereum was so slow, only 15 transactions per second, and even with all the layer 2s that make it faster, it creates a whole host of other issues when you add another blockchain to Ethereum. While solving one problem, you create a new. So it's kind of like taking a drug, and you solve one problem with this and you get these side effects. And we just thought it didn't really make sense when there was an alternative, which we'd found in Solana, which could process 50,000 transactions per second, was super cheap and super energy efficient. So it was kind of like a no-brainer, I would say. We could see so much activity in the ecosystem. So we hard forked it and ran it as a private consortium chain for a year, and then we made it public. and power tokens were used to secure the network. And that allowed us to really understand the technology and see how much do we want to change this, or are we happy with just one version behind Solana, because we'd upgrade our protocol like that. And we just realized that it was actually just so fit for purpose. And if we moved onto mainnet, our products onto mainnet, then we could access all the tools and all the ecosystem, and we could just focus on product, our own product. So it was kind of like a natural progression, I would say, which we just completed on the 13th of October, actually. So we migrated our products onto mainnet, and we're also, we've got, as you said, an ERC20 token called Power, POWR, and that we've locked up a portion of Power, and we've minted a commensurate amount of Power on Solana. So there's Power on Ethereum and Power on Solana, and we're just in the process of setting up liquidity for exchange between those one for one.
And when I was doing my research, my understanding of it is that you no longer have your own chain. You're essentially a product building on top of Solana. And
yes,
I think it's a very smart choice, because a lot of projects are developing their own L1, and we'll see network effects where, let's say, even less than 10, fewer than 10 blockchains will see the most of the activity. But can you run me through this journey of, like, did you discuss it with your business partner and the board and decided that what you're good at is focusing on the energy, not building a new blockchain? What was that thought process there?
Yeah, so John Bullich, my fellow co-founder, he leads the blockchain team, and he's the company's technical director. And he actually, like, early on in his career was a software developer, so he really understands technology deeply. And he understood the limitations of Ethereum, and he and the blockchain team set about searching for the Solana, or the alternative, which ended up being Solana. And yeah, he and the blockchain team, really analyzed this, and we, got together the board, which is John and myself, to review that and make the call to one, originally hard fork Solana and migrate our products from an Ethereum-based consortium chain onto the Solana chain. And then again, we did the same analysis to see about moving to mainnet, like expanding onto mainnet. And it was, there were very little reasons not to do it. So it was actually very compelling when you looked at the whole piece, as you've just pointed out.
Nice. And I want to double down on Powerledger. You guys are available over 12 countries, partnering with over 30 companies. Hopefully this is the latest number, and I'm not spreading misinformation here. But
it's not the latest number, but I think it's not inaccurate. Like, we've done more than 30 projects in 15 countries. And one of the things that happened since we moved to Switzerland a year ago is we started to more deeply, like, when, somebody comes from a utility and says, oh, I really want to do this project, I love blockchain, you do a project with them, after you've completed that project, which might go for 6 months or a year or 2 years even, then you start to find out, like, what's happening beyond that, like, and how much of a mandate does that person have within the company? Is that just their kind of pet project, or is there a bigger strategy at play? And in them having done the project, how much opportunity do they see in the market for them to scale, and is the market ready for that? And so we did this kind of whole of all of our projects assessment once we got to Switzerland, and we really saw that there were 4 places that were of real interest for us in terms of having a large addressable market and a large near-term obtainable market. And so we decided just to narrow our focus down and consolidate our projects to that. So at the moment, we're working in India, Thailand, the US, and also in Austria. We've got some other things in the pipeline, but they're the core activities as well that we're really focused on. And I think this is kind of part of maturing as a company as well. Like, when you first set up a company, like a startup, you've got to prove your capability to build anything. And we, even when our earlier projects were in New Zealand and Australia and Japan, When you go to India, they want to know, can you build a project in India or in France, for example? And so you end up with a lot of lighthouse projects in different places, and that's really good for proving up your capability up to a certain point. But then, you want to scale and actually drive users in particular places. And like, for example, in Austria right now, we've developed a commercial product that we've rolled out already with Energy Steiermark, which is one of the largest utilities there. And they're focused, it's a peer-to-peer trading product. And they're seeing a lot of interest from their customers and new customers to join that utility because of it. And so they're really focused on growing both residential users and also commercial industrial users as well. So we're really focused on scaling up that project and more generally, I would say.
Oh, wow, you cover so much. I have so many questions, but I really want to focus on the peer-to-peer side. So my understanding is that you essentially have a large entity that's producing renewable energy and they can't use all of it. So they're within a circle of peers and they can distribute that. Um, it sounds really good on paper, but could you just outline the benefits of it, but also the challenges that some of the users might face? Because my understanding of it is that if I'm one of the users of this energy and the large entity cannot provide energy at like towards the end of the month for whatever reason because they increase their consumption, doesn't mean that I will be left without energy. Like, would they prioritize their needs over mine? But also, like, how would that work in like a contractual form? Really interested in this, like a peer-to-peer model.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great question. So the utility is the supplier of last resort. So if I say we live on the same street, I've got solar, you don't have anything, and I'm selling my solar to you, but then I don't have any to sell, the utility will provide you the gap. Equally, if I am exporting my solar and you don't need it, the utility will buy the surplus solar from me under what's called a feed-in tariff. And so the utility kind of fills the gaps, on both sides. And that's kind of the reason why you have utilities, at least at this evolution of the electricity market, because they have contracts to buy electricity from other sources of energy to fill the gaps. In the same way, if they bought electricity from a solar farm and sold it to you, they would need to get energy from other places to supply you the totality, 100% of the energy that you need. But it doesn't mean that the solar farms are like an illegitimate source of energy. It's just a variable source of energy, and peer-to-peer is able to provide some of your energy needs, but not all.
And how do you incentivize the utility to join this business model? Because they most likely get it on a lot cheaper price if they buy bulk instead of like literally buying my energy from the solar panels that I've managed to generate. How do you, yeah, essentially how do you incentivize them to join? Because they could just easily say, oh,
Yeah.
I don't want that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're what you're saying here is that it's cheaper for them to get it elsewhere, and that is not necessarily the case. Like sometimes that's the case, but in the places where we're working, it's not the case. So the market dynamics vary from place to place, but like the wholesale cost of electricity has like gone up 2, 3, 4-fold, and so utilities are often losing money from having to buy energy and more volatile pricing from sourcing energy. And in fact, in the UK, where you're based, many utilities went bankrupt because of this, because the wholesale price of electricity got so high. And it used to be Germany that had the highest cost of electricity in the world. But this year, the UK now has taken the helm as the highest cost of electricity in the world. And so rooftop solar actually is a cheaper source of energy. And what that can do is encourage people to join a retailer that's very customer focused and wanting to empower citizens to take control of their energy future, rather than having a relationship with a utility that doesn't really care about them and they don't trust very much. And so this is seen as like a real point of difference to grow their customer base in a way of having a very consumer-centric product.
That's really interesting because my initial thought was that actually the utility could buy it from another larger supplier. That's super interesting, really nice and useful use case. You mentioned France, and I listened to one of your previous interviews, and you gave an example of this company called Ecuador, which is like a French company that enables their users to see where the energy comes from. And you might partner with other companies that have similar use case, but I think that's really interesting because now I just receive my energy. I have no idea where it comes from and how much of it is generated by like renewable sources. Um, so could you just elaborate on this and explain it? I feel like I didn't do justice explaining that use case, but you can explain it a lot more clearly than me.
Yeah, it's a kind of evolving use case. Broadly, the kind of movement around it is called 24/7 matching, and it's where people and companies want to actually get more granular and specific around the type, time, and place of energy, and that information, can be used for, like in the case of companies, they might have like lots of facilities, and they want to look at each site. How much renewable energy have I got? And that could be for procurement purposes. So they know how much of a gap to fill. So say they've just got 40% renewable and they want to get to 50, they can see where the gap is for procurement purposes. And then the other aspect of that is for reporting. So they probably want to prepare reports annually, and they can use the granular and specific information for reporting purposes. Equally, as you said, like, households want to be able to understand where does my energy come from. We've actually been doing a project in Greece as well in this regard with a company that was called Mytilineos but rebranded to Metlen, and they're a very large corporate there, and they've got a retailer subsidiary called Protergia, and Protergia are super innovative, very much like Energy Steiermark in Austria, and they want to be able to provide that visibility to their commercial and industrial customers, and also for EV charging as well. So if you think about, you buy an EV and it's all green, you think, but then you're charging it from the grid, and that might be just plain old energy. And so what Protergia are looking to do is to calculate how much energy is renewable and how much is not, and then using our platform buy and retire renewable energy certificates against that volume of energy, so it can legally and validly be claimed to be renewable energy that's powering the EV.
And I really want us to talk about the energy attribute certificates because when I was prepping for the interview, I started reading about them, but I would like you to explain how blockchain is improving them. My understanding is that we get this annual clearance price, and then we have limited traceability and transparency. It's like for the consumer, which we already touched upon, but also we have limited storage. And blockchains and solutions like Powerledger enables us to get to the next level where we have like a hourly rate, and then we have like this granular transparency for the customer, so you know where the energy comes from, but also you're incentivized to store the energy so you can provide it to your peers. Could you just run me through this? And also, because you're deep within that ecosystem, do you think that governments would actually adopt this completely different mind frame? Are they even open to consider it? Or are we at this stage where we're just talking about it and we realize the benefits, but the governments are still years behind?
I think it's part of like a level setting of like understanding of what some of these commitments were. Like it might have been that many of these companies made these commitments without fully appreciating what was involved, in part. And then the other aspect is some of the companies that are doing that, their businesses are changing shape in quite a fundamental way, and they've realized that the costs of meeting net zero targets with the growth in their business in high energy or high energy intensive sectors is going to be prohibitively expensive. So with cloud companies like that are really doing a lot already in AI and want to grow that part of the business, there's a very strong correlation between the growth of their AI business and the amount of energy that they'll be using. And I think some of them have realized that it's going to be, extremely expensive to do that. And so you've seen Google, Microsoft, AWS take backward steps against prior commitments. And the other was with companies that are not in those sectors. I think I mentioned in the article Gucci, Nestle, and EasyJet. And I think that's just part of a broader sort of apprehension, I would say, towards carbon markets, given late last year there was a big scandal that was outed by The Guardian, where one of the kind of better regarded carbon credit registries was found to have minted carbon credits that didn't actually have underlying projects behind them, and it actually caused a massive decline in buying of carbon credits towards the end of last year as companies began to stop buying to further validate whether they could actually buy real and legitimate credits. Like, how do we actually validate quality where we thought we were getting quality from these particular places, but we're now not sure? You've seen a bounce back of that in terms of the volumes of trading in 2024, but there are certainly some companies that are going, I'm not sure this is actually the path for us as a result of that. So I think that some of these commitments are actually extraordinarily difficult to obtain, notwithstanding also changing the business and making it like an even more difficult objective to achieve as well. And then a broader kind of concern around, I think, the legitimacy of some of these kind of offsets.
So essentially, you're saying that one of the reasons that they're not meeting them is because they have set unrealistic commitments in the first place. But I want to take a step back and talk about the governments as well. So I know that we have like the zero carbon target by the 2030. Oh, nice. I'm so happy that I got that right. So could you tell me whether that's realistic? Because I guess the businesses are aiming to achieve it and they're setting their commitments based on that fundamental line. But would we be able to achieve it? And then how is that reflected on the businesses?
I think it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to achieve it. In actual fact, there are many industries that right now there are not like commercially viable ways to at scale produce these kind of I would call them pillars of of contemporary life, of civilized society. That's steel, cement, fertilizers, and plastics. Those four things. There aren't a very well-regarded researcher from Canada, Vaclav Smil, wrote a book about this, in which he basically said these are the four pillars of modern civilization or industrialized society, and there are presently no viable ways to do those without fossil fuels. So you can't actually make those things at scale, and to actually replace the industrial processes with like electricity instead of fossil fuel processes will take decades. Like actually building the infrastructure to make them as we do right now took like decades and decades. And so there's a limit to actually what can be electrified. And then you're talking about, things like sequestration of carbon or abatement or carbon credits. And, there's not really a kind of standardized way to do that. Many companies are doing that on a voluntary basis. It's very contentious. So I think that, I think it's fraught, I would say, in a word, and it's not a readily attainable thing. So, I think that the energy conversation really needs to be injected with a dose of realism to understand we're not actually in a state of energy transition, we're in a state of energy expansion. Many processes can't be done with electricity, they require fossil fuels to be done. And it's legitimate that we should be able to provide energy for people to lift them out of poverty as well. So I think that there's a lot of things that don't work in the net zero conversation.
And my last question is about your book, which is Empathy and Understanding in Business, and it's co-authored with Chris Voss. I really like one of his books called Never Split the Differences, Negotiates Your Life Depends on It. So tell me a bit more about it. Like, where did you meet him? How was the experience of writing a book with him?
So we connected initially over Zoom, and the publisher that he was working with was looking for other entrepreneurs to jointly author the book with him. And so myself and Chris and the other authors each wrote a chapter on like an experience that around like empathy and understanding in business. And in my case, I wrote about a client from 5 years ago that we did a really good project for, but we actually didn't win the contract beyond that because we hadn't understood them fully enough. And they ended up choosing a local supplier. At the time we were in Australia, and it was a European company. And we didn't really understand sufficiently the context that they were operating in terms of the strategy, the market, the regulations. So they didn't feel as, even though we did the project well, we didn't really understand how that project fitted into the broader situation that they were operating in. And so they didn't feel fully understood by us. And I think that really informed how we go about doing at Powerledger, how we do projects with them. And so I wrote about like that failure and then what we learned from that and how we how we'd taken that into how we operate in the business. And then in terms of meeting Chris, we met initially at the book launch, which was fabulous. We had that in Las Vegas at the start of this year, and the book went to bestseller in 2 categories on Amazon, which was really exciting. And then we met again recently in Los Angeles because we received an award from the National Academy of Bestselling Authors. And then Chris has just started a TV show called That's Right, which is coming out later this year on, I think, ABC, Fox, CBC, NBC, pardon me. And he interviewed me for his new TV series as well. So I got the opportunity to spend some more time with him then. And yeah, he's really very impressive and quite nonchalant, I would say. Yeah, he obviously really enjoys interacting with other people. So he's spent a lot of time understanding how to communicate with them in such a way that's really persuasive, engaging, and charming. And he's kind of broken that apart and created these kind of very easy to understand ways that other people can do similar things. So I've learned a lot from the things from that book that you mentioned, Never Split the Difference, as well as collaborating with him on our latest book together.
And do you believe that empathy is a transferable skill? Because we are taught from a very young age to be empathetic, and we believe that at some point of our life we achieve that. But I don't think that we can implement this directly within business settings. So could you just tell me a bit more about your experience? Because I've encountered some people that are really good at it on a personal level, but struggle to implement it in a business environment. And the second part of the question is like, how do you implement this skill that you've already honed throughout the years in a business environment? Like, what's the extra features that you need to add to it to make sure that it's applicable there as well?
Yeah, I mean, for me, they actually feel quite indistinguishable. Like, we're having a conversation right now, and, even beforehand, we were like, chatting for quite a while, and like getting to know each other. And, there's a way of like listening and actually communicating back what you've understood. So, in the simplest, when somebody says something to you, you could just say, yes, okay. Or you could go, oh, it sounds like what's really important to you from this is, and explain that and demonstrate your understanding by not repeating what they said, but demonstrate by recapping what you understand is important to the person by what they're saying. And I think that what that does is builds rapport and trust. And that happens in business and your personal relationships. I think it's everywhere. And I would say I wouldn't distinguish between how I approach it in the business environment to like anywhere else, actually. So maybe that's what the thing is for your friend, that it's like, no, maybe it needs to be indistinguishable in terms of the approach, because people are people everywhere. It's not like, well, I'm a robot in the business environment and I don't really want to build rapport or understand what's behind someone or what makes them tick or why is this really important. They're the same kind of core principles in relationships, I would say, in many respects.
Yeah, I guess the reason that she was struggling is because she was lacking the essential business skills. So she's very good at understanding people, but she couldn't understand why something is important for the business. And I guess that was the discrepancy and the reason that she wasn't as effective, because in her personal relationships, she was she could easily connect to the person because she has experienced something similar, and even though it might not be the same experience, she could easily understand it. But within like a business environment, she didn't have the required experience to understand why a founder is stressed that there's only 2 hours before this call with a very important investor. So yeah, I guess that was the reason, not the empathy. But now that I'm talking about it, kind of you're helping me understand it myself.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing what you're saying there, it sounds to me like, uh, you know, one-on-one, it's much easier to understand a person, but an organization is much more complicated. And, understanding what's important to a business, what's a business? A business is a collection of people that work in the company and that run the company and the shareholders that own the company. So there's like a lot of different conversations going in to what a company actually is. So you've actually got to have like a lot of different conversations, I would say, to really understand what's important to a business. It's not necessarily, or it might be that founder that's about to go on a call, it might be that they like are running out of money. And so they've only got like 3 months left of runway. And so that call's like really important to them. Or it might be that actually they've got a big client that if they pay on time, it will all be fine, and they only need the money if that's late. And so there's a different pressure going on around like making sure a client pays. So, I think there's a lot more to unpack and understand in a business setting than there is perhaps with an individual. And that's probably when you said she doesn't have the experience, then that's something that takes some time to actually fully like get across.
No, I really like it. And now thinking about it, I think that the business is, as you said, a collection of a lot of people, and you should be able to understand every single one of them. But also there might be conflicting interests. So sometimes the CTO might be thinking this, but the CEO might be thinking something else.
Yes.
And they might not be aligned for whatever reason. So now you encounter this challenge of, okay, I understand both of you, but you're not aligned as a business. How am I supposed to operate and help you? Yeah, but that's very interesting talking about this theoretical level. But when you sit down and try to implement it, I'm sure it is extremely challenging. I really want to learn about. I'm sure they've kind of gain a lot of knowledge and experience while writing the book. But if you could summarize it and present it into just a few points of the two or even three the most important things they've learned, what would they be? And also just explain to me, how do you use them into like a day-to-day?
Yeah, so I think that if you think about what's the ingredients to have you trust somebody, there's like, a handful of things that have you be left with the feeling, I trust somebody or not. The first thing, and I got actually this understanding from a woman in the US called Carrie Granger. But the first thing is around truth. So do I trust you to be truthful? which is like, say it how it is without anything missing. Would you say the same thing to me as you would to someone else? That's the kind of domain of truth. Second is around accountability. Can I trust you to be accountable? Like, will Ivan be on time or otherwise communicate in advance? Will he, if he doesn't hit his deadline, will he let me know in enough time that I can do something about it, or even help me find another solution? Will he deal with the impact of not doing the thing? And if all those things are yes, then I probably have a high level degree of trust for you in the area or domain of accountability. Then there's the domain of like kind of expertise or competency. Like I would trust you to do a podcast, but I might not trust you to fly a plane that I'm on. So there's like domain expertise as well. So it's like you will hear people go, I would never trust this person to do X, Y, Z, but I might trust them in this other respect. So there are sort of these sort of domains as well. And then the fourth one, pardon me, is called what is called things that are of importance. What's of fundamental importance? So if I tell you, look, Ivan, like it's really important to me to feed my kids every night at 6 o'clock. And I have this kind of 2-hour window called the witching hour from 6 to 8 where I feed my kids and I bath them and I put them to bed. And so I can do a podcast with you anytime, but not that time. And you go, look, I'm really busy. That's the only time I've got to offer you. And I go, all right, well, Ivan is not really placing any importance on what's important to me. So I might do the podcast with you then. But then I go, I don't really want to do another one with him because he doesn't really care about me. And so if I go, to my colleague, it's really important that we get this report to the client on this time. And then they just don't do it. Then then I'm going to go, well, I don't really trust that person because I've told them that's really important to me, and they haven't made it important. And you'll find in relationships, if you look at your own ones, the ones that people you trust are the ones that know what's important to you and actually place some emphasis on that. And it's not to say they'll always do that, but they hold it important. And even if they can't do it, they go, I know that's really important to you and I'm sorry I can't do that. So they attend to it, even if they don't do the thing that's important to you. So they place emphasis on it. And I think trust is built on these kind of pillars, if you like. And then within the context of business, there's, what the project that we're doing with the client, which is like a project with like a delivery schedule. But then why is that important? Like, is it just because one guy wants to do it? No, it's usually because it's inside a strategy. What's the strategy? You've got to understand, why will this project support what's of fundamental importance to the client and actually help them implement that strategy and get a particular outcome? And then what's going on in the broader sense in the market that will help them achieve that strategy as well with your input? And what's going on regulatory wise that they're thinking about that's happening or might happen that actually has them want to do this as well? So there's like the current situation, what might happen regulatory wise, as well as the strategy. And so they're kind of different layers, I think, to understand why they're doing what they're doing. So that when you're doing your project, you're going, oh, I'm not going to do it this way because I know this is important to them. So actually having that broader picture of why this is important helps you in the way you go about doing things, the order, how you might communicate, how you might attend to things. And so I think this is kind of like a systems way of thinking. And with the client that I wrote about in the book, where we were just focused on the project, we didn't really understand why this project was important to them and what it was fulfilling on. That was of fundamental importance. So I don't know if that answers your question or gives you a bit more context.
No, it definitely does. And while you were talking about it, and whenever I read a book like How to Win Friends and Influence People, or any other book that teaches us about these interactions with people, I always end up thinking all you need to do is just being respectful of other people, but also being very considerate. And for some reason, people like founders, especially on a comparatively high level, have been struggling a lot with it, and I don't attribute it to the fact that they're terrible people, because I'm sure that every single person is good. I believe that people are inherently good, but there is like this discrepancy of people being inherently good, but also many founders, especially of startups or once they reach a certain level, struggle to be empathetic and understand why other projects need whatever. Um, so I hope you understand the questions, but it's why do we see that of like difference between us being good people, inherently good, but also for some reason not being able to conduct ourselves as good people when it comes to like business environments.
Yeah, I think that there's a conflation of like morality and accountability, and they're two separate things. Like morality is where I have to do be perfect, otherwise, there's something wrong with me. Whereas accountability is actually about dealing with reality. Like accountability could be like, I'm not going to do that thing on time. How can we deal with the impact? And I'm going to communicate as early as I possibly can rather than as late as I possibly can. And as late as I possibly can communicate, or not at all, it's because I'm avoiding dealing with reality. I'm hiding out, and I don't want to look bad, or I'm like avoiding looking bad. Whereas accountability is about, how do I create the most workability in what I'm doing? How do I actually make it easier to deal with my absence or me not doing my thing that I'm going to contribute? And so it's kind of reframing it away from good and bad into, how do I create as much workability in, and it might, you said the word like being considerate and polite. It could be considered inconsiderate and polite to go, I'm not going to do that anymore. Actually, that could, but that leaves other people with much bigger range of options to deal with that circumstance. And I'd say the other thing about it is sometimes, we've just been talking about things that you've committed to do, but sometimes other people will have expectations of you for things that you actually have never said you would do. And I think part of being accountable is actually attending to those things as well proactively. For example, if uh, you have an expectation of me that I'm going to do something and I've not said I'm going to do it, I could just ignore it and go, well, I never said I'm going to do that. But if I go, look, Ivan, it seems to me like you're expecting me to do this thing. And it's a reasonable expectation, but I just want to let you know I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. That allows you to actually, like me, that allows me to kind of address your expectations and actually restore some accountability. But it's a one-way street, I think. Like, it's not like I get to expect everyone else to come and do that with me. It's about like I have to proactively do that with other people to create. And it's not about like right and wrong. It's about what creates the most amount of workability in that situation. And then there are some things where you haven't committed explicitly to do something, but others expect you to do it. And if you don't address them, in another respect, you'll cause problems in your relationships as well. So, for example, if I leave the office, I've never like committed to my business partner that when I leave the office, I'll lock the door. But if I don't lock the door when I leave the office, he'll be like, "Why didn't you lock the door?" And I said, "Well, I never promised that I was going to lock the door." You can see that actually there's quite a lot of things that we do need to do that we haven't made an explicit agreement around. And if we don't actually attend to them, that will cause problems in relationships as well. So I think if you start to look at like all of this stuff through, how do I actually create more workability, improve performance, it opens the window to have more conversations earlier, to try and like address things. And I think things work better like that.
No, I love this. I definitely agree that we have to refrain from thinking of bad and wrong, good and bad, and whether the act itself and trying to evaluate the act. And it's about creating an environment that's pleasant to work. And you use that word, creating workability, and I really like it. And I want to leave us on that note, which is very positive. But what's the best way for listeners and viewers to find you? Where are you most active, and can they reach out to you in case they have any questions about the project or your books or yourself?
Yeah, I mean, probably the easiest way is on X or LinkedIn, but you can also contact Powerledger via our website at powerledger.io.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.